How much does family loyalty cost? For one woman, the price was set at $40,000. Welcome to the channel, Revenge Mindset, the home of powerful revenge stories where betrayal meets justice, and every twist delivers payback. Today, we are diving into the story of a woman who was treated like a ghost by her own family, until they decided her life's work was their personal bank account. Go ahead and like this video, share it with someone who might understand, and make sure you're subscribed because you are not going to want to miss the cold, methodical, and absolutely ironclad plan she put into action, and the final chilling confrontation. Let's begin. The suburbs are full of ghosts. I just happened to be one of them. My family saw me when they needed something, and the rest of the time, I was just a picture on the mantelpiece. But when I heard them planning to finance my brother's latest disaster with my soul, I decided it was time to become a ghost for real. A ghost in their bank accounts. It always started with the drive, that long, winding pilgrimage from the clean, geometric certainty of Manhattan back to the suffocating, floral wallpapered embrace of my childhood home. Every mile closer, I could feel the armor I'd spent years forging begin to thin, the calm, methodical control I'd cultivated piece by piece threatening to dissolve into the humid, sentimental air of that house. My apartment in the city is a fortress of logic. Clean lines, measured spaces, everything tracked to the last cent. It is a monument to self-reliance, a testament to the fact that I built my life without a single handout, without a single shred of their support. They called it my shoebox in the sky. To me, it was the only place I could breathe. The family home, by contrast, was a museum of a life I was never truly a part of. Every surface was cluttered with memories, but they were almost exclusively his. Tyler's first steps, Tyler's T-ball trophies, Tyler's high school graduation, his face beaming, my parents flanking him like proud sentinels. My own achievements were conspicuously absent. My state school diploma, earned while working 2 jobs because they deemed it an unnecessary expense for a daughter. He was tucked away in a drawer somewhere, probably under a pile of Tyler's old report cards. To them, his failures were ambitious ventures. My success was just a utility, a resource. This visit was like all the others. An obligation. A box to be checked on the quarterly report of my life titled Family Duty. The air was thick with the cloying sweetness of my mother's potpourri and the unspoken tension of my brother's latest catastrophe. Tyler, my younger brother, was a black hole of potential, a vortex of failed business ventures that always ended with him back on the living room sofa, his face a mask of wounded pride. This time, he'd managed to rack up $40,000 in debt, a truly spectacular flameout, even for him. I was in the hallway pulling on my coat, preparing my escape. I'd done my time, smiled through the passive-aggressive comments about my work schedule, and listened to another one of Tyler's half-baked plans for redemption. I just needed to make it out the door. But then I heard their voices from the kitchen. Low, conspiratorial, my mother's tone, the one she used when she was smoothing things over, laced with a sympathy that was as sweet and toxic as antifreeze. "Don't worry," she was saying to Tyler. Her voice was a soft, cloying murmur. "We'll figure this out. We always do." Then, the words that would change everything, the words that would finally, irrevocably, sever the last frayed thread of hope I ever had for them. "We'll make your sister pay for it," she said, as casually as if she were discussing who would pick up milk from the store. "It's the least she can do." My father's voice, a low rumble of agreement, followed immediately. "What's the point of her making all that money if she can't help her family?" My blood didn't run cold. My heart didn't pound in my chest. There was no sudden cinematic rush of anger. There was only a profound, chilling silence, a stillness that settled deep in my bones. In that single moment, they hadn't just talked about my money. They were talking about my life. My life. They were talking about the 16-hour days staring at spreadsheets until my vision blurred. The missed holidays. The years of instant ramen and secondhand furniture. The gut-wrenching decision to sell the one piece of jewelry my grandmother had left me just to make rent in my final year of college. All of it, Every sacrifice, every ounce of grit, every quiet, lonely victory I had clawed for myself in the dark. To them, it was just a number, a balance in an account they felt entitled to withdraw from. They were speaking of my life's work as if it were a savings account they had set up for their darling boy. The injustice of it was so total, so absolute, that it transcended anger. It was a mathematical certainty, a final proven theorem. I was not their daughter, I was their asset. And I was about to be liquidated. Something inside me didn't break. It calcified. The faint, flickering hope that I might one day earn their respect, that they might finally see me for who I was and not what I had, was extinguished, snuffed out, forever. The loss was immediate and total. It was the death of my identity as their daughter. In the span of a single sentence, I had been orphaned, and they had become my creditors. Or rather, they intended to. They had just made the fatal error of assuming I would honor a debt I never owed. I didn't storm into the kitchen. I didn't scream or cry or demand an explanation. What would have been the point? Arguing would have been a performance. A tired, predictable play I'd been a part of my whole life. They would have deployed their arsenal of practiced tactics, the gaslighting, the guilt, the appeals to a family duty that only ever flowed in one direction. They would have called me selfish, cried and worn me down until I conceded, not because I was wrong, but because I was exhausted. I saw it for what it was. A game, a negotiation where my only role was to capitulate. And in that moment of cold clarity, standing in that dimly lit hallway, I realized a fundamental truth of strategy. The only winning move was not to play. So I turned. My movements were silent, deliberate. I took my hand off the doorknob, stepped back from the kitchen door, and walked towards the front of the house. Each footstep on the worn carpet was silent, a ghost in my own past. I opened the front door, slipped out into the cool evening air, and closed it behind me with a soft, final click. They didn't even hear me leave. The drive back to New York was a 2-hour vacuum. The city lights smeared across the windshield, a Monet of indifference. I didn't cry. There was nothing left to cry for. My face was a mask of calm, a placid surface above the tectonic shift that had just demolished the entire landscape of my life. For 2 hours, I just drove. The engine hummed a steady, monotonous tune. My hands were steady on the wheel. I thought about the girl who used to cry in her room because her parents missed her school play to go to her brother's soccer game. The girl who studied for her SATs by flashlight because Tyler was watching a movie in the living room and she wasn't allowed to disturb him. The girl who longed for a single, uncomplicated word of praise that wasn't immediately followed by a request for something for her brother. I mourned her. I mourned her desperate, pathetic need for an approval that would never come. And then, somewhere on the New Jersey Turnpike, under the cold orange glow of the streetlights, I buried her. When I walked into my apartment, the silence was different. It wasn't the silence of loneliness anymore. It was the silence of security, of sovereignty. I placed my keys in the small ceramic bowl by the door. A ritual, a small act of reclaiming my space, my life. Everything here I had bought. Every book on the shelf, every plate in the kitchen, every pixel on the monitor in my home office. It was all mine. It was the only place I had ever felt truly safe. They had never been here. My mother, seeing a photo once, had called it a shoebox in Thesky. Cold. Impersonal. She couldn't understand that the clean lines and lack of clutter were a direct reaction to the suffocating, emotional mess of her own home. This wasn't a shoebox, it was my fortress. And they had just declared war. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't pour a drink. I walked past the living area, into the small room I used as an office. I sat down in the ergonomic chair that had cost me a week's salary and woken my laptop from its sleep. The screen flared to life, illuminating my face in its cool blue light. I didn't check my email. I didn't look at the news. I opened a single file, my assets, my investments, my net worth, a complex, beautiful spreadsheet of my own creation, a digital representation of my freedom. I stared at the numbers, not with pride, not with greed, but with the dispassionate focus of a general reviewing their armaments before a battle. Every cell, every formula, was a stone in the wall I had built around myself. In moments of stress, my habit was to check my investment portfolio. It was a tangible reminder of my independence, a real-time graph of my own resilience. This was the biggest stress I had ever faced. But as I looked at the screen, a new feeling began to settle over me. The cold resolve that had taken root on the drive home began to sharpen. It honed itself into a fine, dangerous point. I started to draft a plan. Not with rage, but with the methodical precision of a financial analyst mitigating a risk. My family, in their spectacular entitled blindness, had made a critical miscalculation. They saw their quiet, overlooked daughter, the one who should be grateful for any attention, the one whose desire for their approval was a lever they could pull at will. They saw the emotional, pliable girl they had raised me to be. They forgot I was a financial professional. They were so certain of my emotional obedience that they never once considered I had the skill, the resources, and the cold-blooded will to financially excommunicate them from my life. They were planning a simple shakedown. They were oblivious to the fact that they were dealing with a seasoned strategist who viewed their plot as a hostile takeover attempt, and I was about to respond with overwhelming force. They were about to learn the difference. The difference. It's a strange thing to mourn yourself, but that's what I did on the drive back to New York. I grieved for the girl who spent her life trying to earn a love that was never on the table. A girl who thought her worth was something that could be negotiated. By the time I saw the skyline, she was gone. The overheard conversation in the kitchen wasn't a betrayal in the end. It was a diagnosis. It was the final, irrefutable data point in a lifetime of research, confirming the terminal nature of my family's emotional bankruptcy. I didn't need to cry over it. I needed to divest. My apartment, my shoebox in the sky, became my command center. Their world is one of cluttered emotions, of manipulative sentimentality and unexamined assumptions. Mine is a world of clean lines, hard data, and consequences. They had operated under the assumption that their emotional leverage over me was an infinite resource. They believed the daughter they raised would simply absorb this latest debt, just as she had absorbed 1,000 smaller slights before. They forgot that the daughter they ignored had spent a decade in the most ruthless city on earth, learning how to quantify risk, hedge against loss, and execute a strategy with surgical precision. They saw a daughter. They were about to meet a creditor. The plan I drafted that night wasn't born from rage, it was an audit. A cold, methodical unwinding of a portfolio that had gone toxic. The time for quiet planning was over. It was time to start closing accounts. The next morning, the city was a symphony of purposeful noise. It was a stark contrast to the stagnant, suffocating quiet of my parents' suburb. I wasn't nursing a wound. I was executing a corporate restructuring of my own life. My first meeting wasn't with a friend or a therapist. It was at a law firm in a glass tower overlooking Bryant Park. The office was all steel, mahogany, and quiet, expensive competence. It smelled of paper and power. It was the most comforting room I had been in years. Mr. Davies was in his late 50s, with eyes that had seen every form of human folly that could be codified in a legal document. He listened without interruption as I laid out the situation. I didn't frame it as a family drama. I didn't use words like betrayed or hurt. I presented it as a hostile takeover attempt of my personal assets by a related party. They have no legal claim to my income, I stated, my voice even. But their primary leverage is emotional and social. They will attempt to create a narrative of me as a cruel, ungrateful daughter. I need to preemptively neutralize that narrative by creating a legal framework so rigid, so absolute, that any attempt at emotional manipulation becomes irrelevant. He blinked, just once. "You want to build a wall," he said. "I want to build a fortress," I corrected him. "And I want the deed in my name." I didn't need a shoulder to cry on. I needed an ironclad living trust that would make my assets untouchable. I needed him to review the durable power of attorney I had foolishly signed years ago, naming my father as my agent in case of incapacitation, and have it revoked and replaced. Replaced with what? Replaced with a chain of command that ended with a corporate trustee. I would rather have my life's work managed by a stranger from a bank than by the people who gave me life. We drafted a cease and desist letter to be held on standby, ready to be deployed the moment any of them tried to make contact with me at my place of work. This is, he started, then paused, searching for the right word. Thorough. It's risk mitigation, I replied. The only family closure I was interested in was closing their access to my accounts. Permanently. I left his office feeling a new kind of power, not the adrenaline of anger, but the calm, humming certainty of a well-executed plan. The legal framework was being laid. Now it was time to pour the concrete. That afternoon, back in my apartment, the war began. Not with a bang, but with a click. My first target was the last pathetic financial thread connecting me to them, a joint savings account with my mother. It was an old account, opened when I was a teenager to deposit birthday checks. It currently held $412. She called it the rainy day fund, a pittance she could lord over me, a symbol of her supposed generosity. The irony was suffocating. She was plotting to take $40,000 from me while this tiny account existed as a testament to her support. Logging into the bank portal felt like keying in launch codes. I found the account, saw both our names listed there. I initiated the transfer of the full balance to my primary checking account, $412. Then I navigated to the account services page, close account. A pop-up asked me, "Are you sure?" For a second, a ghost of the old me surfaced, a flicker of guilt. This was a formal act, an undeniable severing. I thought of my mother's voice in the kitchen. "We'll make your sister pay for it." I clicked, confirm. A small green notification appeared. Your account has been successfully closed. It was the most satisfying sentence I had read in a decade. Every click of the mouse was a door slamming shut. That first one was the hardest, a rusty hinge of obligation groaning in protest. But it opened the floodgates. Next, my 401, my retirement, my future, dashboard, with a large balance displayed. I logged into the portal, beneficiaries. There they were, a neat little list. 1. Mother. 2. Father. 3. Tyler. Primary, secondary, tertiary. A neat succession plan for the spoils of my life. I clicked the edit button. The cursor blinked. I held down the backspace key and watched my mother's name disappear. Letter by letter, then my father's, then Tyler's, 3 little deletions. A digital execution. I needed a new beneficiary. I thought for a moment. Then I typed, the Elizabeth my last name grant for women in finance. A scholarship to be established at my alma mater, the state school they'd called a waste of money. It would be awarded to a young woman from a low-income background who, like me, had to fight for every inch. Let them come after that. Let them try to explain to a judge why their son's failed t-shirt business was more important than a dozen women's futures. By the 10th click, it felt like breathing. Life insurance policy. Same procedure. Their names erased. The charity named. I was methodically removing them from my death as well as my life. There would be no inheritance, no windfall from some tragic accident. My death, like my life, would be my own. The feeling wasn't sadness. It wasn't even anger, it was order. It was the deep, profound satisfaction of tidying up a messy ledger, of balancing the books once and for all. The financial lockdown was complete. Now for the digital excommunication. This part was bolder, more personal. I picked up my phone, the smooth, cool glass of familiar weight in my hand. I opened my contacts. First, Mom. Her picture, a smiling, slightly too filtered selfie, looked up at me. I stared at it, feeling nothing. I tapped her name, scrolled to the bottom of the screen. Block this caller. A confirmation prompt appeared. I pressed block contact. Her picture vanished. She was gone. Next, Dad, tap, scroll, block, gone. Tyler, tap, scroll, block, gone. I went through my text messages, deleting our entire history. Years of one-sided conversations, of my detailed updates met with one-word replies, of my questions about their lives met with requests for money for Tyler. Delete, delete, delete. I was wiping the slate clean. Then social media. This was the public facade, the carefully curated gallery of the happy family my mother was so proud of. She would post photos of me on my graduation day, the one they didn't attend, with captions like, "So proud of our girl." The sky's the limit. They used photos of me, of my success, to bolster their image of themselves as perfect, supportive parents. It was a lie, a performance, and I was done being their unwilling co-star. I started with the photo tags. I went through every picture, meticulously untagging myself. With each click, I became a little more anonymous on her page, a ghost in her curated memories. Then, the final step, I navigated to her profile page. Friends. I clicked the button. Unfriend. And for good measure, block. I did the same for my father and my brother. I erased their digital footprint from my life. It was time to revoke their license to my story. My life was no longer their source material. The silence that followed was absolute. No calls, no texts, no notifications. The constant, low-level hum of their expectations and demands had ceased. For the first time since I'd left for college, my phone was truly mine. The peace was intoxicating. For 3 weeks, I lived in that peace. I worked, I slept, I read. I felt the tight knot of anxiety in my stomach. A companion I'd had for so long I'd forgotten it was there, finally begin to unwind. My fortress was complete. The walls were up, the accounts were secure, the lines of communication were cut. I was safe. I was perhaps a little too confident. I was beginning to believe it was that simple. That was my mistake. That was my hubris. My phone buzzed on my desk. I glanced at it, an email. My stomach dropped. The sender was my Aunt Carol, my mother's older sister. The family diplomat. The one who prided herself on being the reasonable one, a self-appointed Switzerland in a war I was supposed to be the only one fighting. My finger hovered over the notification. This was a move I hadn't anticipated. They weren't trying to breach the walls themselves. They were sending in a Trojan horse, cloaked in concern and smelling of fresh-baked cookies. I opened the email. "Dearest Elizabeth," it began. My teeth clenched. "I hope this email finds you well. I'm just writing because your mother called me, and she is absolutely beside herself with worry. She says she and your father can't get a hold of you, that your phone seems to be off. Tyler is worried sick too. We were all just hoping you were all right. Please just give one of us a call so we know you're safe. Love, Aunt Carol." Worried sick? It was perfect. It was their masterpiece. They knew a direct assault wouldn't work, so they weaponized the concern of a genuinely decent person. They had painted me as the source of their pain, the missing, possibly endangered child, casting themselves as the frantic, loving parents. It was a brilliant, disgusting piece of emotional maneuvering. For a split second, the old conditioning kicked in. A pang of guilt, sharp and familiar. The urge to just call and smooth things over, to reassure everyone that I was fine, to avoid the family drama, the desire to not be the villain in their story. Then the new me took over. The analyst. I saw the tactic for what it was. A probe, a test of my defenses. If I responded emotionally, if I called my aunt and unloaded, she would become their conduit. If I called my mother to appease her, the wall would be breached. If I ignored it, they would escalate, telling more relatives, painting me as even more unstable and cruel. The new me doesn't respond to guilt. The new me responds to strategy. I sat there for a long time, drafting a reply in my head. It had to be a work of art. It had to be calm, polite, appreciative, and completely and utterly impenetrable. It had to end the conversation while simultaneously signaling that my actions were deliberate and that I was in complete control. Finally, I wrote back. "Hi, Aunt Carol. Thanks so much for checking in. I really appreciate your concern. Everything is fine. I've just been incredibly busy with a major project at work and have been trying to limit distractions. I'm just making some long overdue changes to simplify my life. I'm sorry if Mom was worried. That certainly wasn't my intention. Hope you and Uncle David are well. Best, Elizabeth. It was perfect. It was polite. It acknowledged her concern. It provided a plausible, corporate-sounding excuse. It was a message. Not to my aunt, but through her, to them. This isn't a phase. This isn't a mistake. This is a decision. It told them, in the calmest possible way, that the person they were trying to reach was no longer in service. I hit send, and in that moment I knew I was going to win. They had launched their most sophisticated weapon, the guilt of a good person, and it had bounced off the armor. My resolve was no longer just a plan. It had been tested by fire, and it had held. My polite, sterile email to my aunt was a declaration of war disguised as a thank you note. I'd parried their first real thrust, the weaponized concern, the deployment of a well-meaning relative, and it had glanced off the armor I was meticulously assembling. For 3 weeks, the silence that followed felt like victory. It was the clean, quiet hum of a secured perimeter. But I knew it was just the eerie calm before a storm. They had tested my defenses with a reconnaissance probe and found them unexpectedly robust. Their next move wouldn't be so subtle. The old me would have been terrified, sick with anxiety, waiting for the other shoe to drop. The new me, the analyst, simply factored it into the equation. Their emotional playbook was predictable. When guilt failed, anger was the next logical step. When persuasion was ineffective, they would pivot to brute force. I had won a battle of wits, but the final, messy, emotional confrontation was still on the horizon. My fortress was built, my assets secure, but the war wasn't over until they formally surrendered. And they wouldn't do that until they understood, in no uncertain terms, the full scope of their miscalculation. So I didn't hide. I prepared. I set the stage for the final act, not with fear, but with the cold, patient focus of a predator laying a trap. The silence wasn't peace. It was an ambush, waiting to be sprung. The quiet lasted for another 6 days. 6 days of digital silence, 6 days of me going to work, managing my portfolio, and living in the clean, orderly world I had built for myself. But it was a charged silence. The kind of quiet that precedes a lightning strike. I knew they were regrouping. I could almost picture the frantic phone calls, the whispered strategy sessions in that cluttered, suffocating kitchen. My aunt would have reported back. She says she's fine. Just busy. They would have dissected my email, searching for cracks, for a hint of the emotional, pliable girl they thought they knew. They would have found nothing, and that would have terrified them more than any angry tirade. The attack, when it came, was exactly what I had predicted. A direct frontal assault, bypassing all the channels I had closed. It came as an email from my father, an account he never used, one I had overlooked blocking because it had been dormant for years. The subject line was a cliché of manufactured importance. The message itself was a masterclass in passive-aggressive panic. "Elizabeth," it read, "your mother is having health problems because of the stress you are putting her under. This has gone on long enough. We are your family. We are having a video call tomorrow night at 7 p.m. to discuss this. All of us. This is not a request." There it was, the pivot from concern to command, the appeal to a sense of family duty they themselves had torched, and the classic, textbook move of blaming me for my mother's health problems, a vague, unverified ailment that was always her go-to weapon in any emotional conflict. And at the center of it all, that beautiful, arrogant, fatal mistake. This is not a request. They still thought they were in charge. They still believed they could summon me, that their authority was an immutable law of nature. They had no idea that they weren't sending a summons. They were walking, willingly, into a final audit. I spent the next 24 hours preparing, not with anxiety, but with the meticulous focus of a litigator preparing for trial. I reviewed every document from Mr. Davies. I opened my master spreadsheet, the one that detailed my entire financial life, and prepared to share my screen. I positioned my laptop on my clean, minimalist desk, ensuring the background was the neutral, impersonal wall of my apartment. There would be no family photos, no sentimental clutter to give them an emotional foothold. This was not a family chat. This was a hostile negotiation, and I was coming to the table with all the leverage. At 6:59 p.m. the next evening, I clicked the link they had sent. I was admitted to the video call, and there they were, the holy trinity of my dysfunctional past, assembled like a tribunal. My father, his face a thundercloud of self-righteous anger. My mother, artfully dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue, her face a mask of wounded martyrdom. And Tyler, wedged between them, looking sullen and aggrieved, the spoiled prince whose allowance had been unexpectedly cut off. The floral wallpaper behind them was so familiar it made my stomach tighten for a brief second. A flicker of the old world. I let the silence hang in the air. I didn't speak first. The burden of action was on them. My father predictably broke first. "Elizabeth," he boomed, his voice distorted by the cheap laptop microphone. "What in God's name do you think you're doing? Do you have any idea what you've put your mother through?" "Hello, Father," I said. My voice was calm, steady, betraying nothing. It was the voice I used with difficult clients. Polite, professional, and utterly detached. My mother began to sob, a theatrical, shuddering performance that had always been her opening gambit. "We were so worried," she wailed. "We thought something had happened to you, and to find out you've just been ignoring us? Blocking us? How could you be so cruel?" Cruel. It was always about my cruelty, never about their actions. Tyler finally spoke, his voice dripping with resentment. "It's insane, Liz. We needed your help. We're family, and you just disappear? After everything Mom and Dad have done for you?" I let their accusations fill the digital space. I listened. I absorbed it all. I let them empty their chambers, fire all their ammunition. The guilt. The anger. The manufactured worry. It all washed over me, and for the first time in my life, I felt nothing. The words were just noise, data points. When they finally paused, breathless from their own indignation, I took a breath. This was it. The moment. The pivot point of my entire life. "I know about the $40,000, I said. The silence that followed was a thing of beauty. It was a perfect crystalline vacuum. My father's mouth, which had been open to deliver another round of bluster, hung slightly agape. My mother's fake tears froze on her face. Tyler's resentful scowl was wiped clean, replaced by the wide-eyed panic of a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar. I was in the hallway, I continued, my voice still perfectly level, a surgeon's scalpel dissecting a tumor. I heard everything. I heard you telling Tyler not to worry. I heard you say, "We'll make your sister pay for it." I heard you, Dad. Ask what the point of me making money was if I couldn't help the family. "So let's be very clear," I said, leaning forward just slightly, my eyes fixed on the webcam. "This isn't about my cruelty. This is about your expectations. This is about a bill you tried to send to me for a debt I never incurred." My mother found her voice first, a sputtering, panicked denial. "You misunderstood." "We were just talking." "We didn't mean it like that." "Didn't you?" I asked. "I've had some time to think about it, and I've decided to take your advice. I've decided to help the family. I am going to help us all, right now, by establishing some very clear, very permanent boundaries." My father started to bluster again. "Now you listen here, young lady." "No," I said, and the word was a blade. "You listen. You have been operating under a set of assumptions for the last 28 years. Assumption 1, that I am your emotional and financial safety net. Assumption 2, that your access to my life and my resources is unconditional. As of 3 weeks ago, both of those assumptions are incorrect. I'm going to share my screen with you now," I said. "This is my life, the one I built. The one you felt entitled to. I want you to see it." I walked them through it, line by line, with the dispassionate clarity of an auditor. "This is my investment portfolio. As you can see, the beneficiaries have been updated. The sole beneficiary in the event of my death is now a scholarship fund for women in finance at my alma mater." I could see their faces in a small window in the corner of the screen. Their expressions were a mixture of confusion and horror. "This is my life insurance policy, also updated. This is my 401, also updated. This is the new, irrevocable living trust I had drafted by my attorney. It ensures that my assets are managed by a corporate trustee in the event I am incapacitated. You are not named. I clicked to another screen, a scanned document. This is the revocation of the durable power of attorney I signed when I was 21. My father is no longer my agent. In fact, none of you are. And finally, I said, closing the spreadsheet and returning to the video call. The joint savings account with a balance of $412 has been closed. I have blocked your phone numbers, your email addresses, and your social media profiles. You have no legal or financial access to me or my assets. You have no digital access to my life. This conversation we are having right now is the last one we will ever have. My mother finally broke. The fake tears were gone, replaced by real ones. Tears of rage. "You monster," she hissed. "After everything we did for you. We gave you a home. We raised you. You gave me a room." I corrected her, my voice still dangerously calm. "In a house where I was treated like a second-class citizen. You didn't raise a daughter. You incubated an asset, and I am officially revoking your access to the dividend." Tyler, finally understanding the totality of his loss, exploded. "You can't do this. I needed that money. You're ruining my life." "No, Tyler," I said. "Your choices are ruining your life. I am simply refusing to finance them any longer. The Bank of Elizabeth is closed, permanently." I looked at all three of them. Three strangers on a screen, their faces contorted in a mixture of shock, rage, and dawning, helpless despair. They finally saw me. Not the quiet, compliant daughter. They saw the fortress, they saw the strategist. They saw the woman who had taken everything they thought they knew about her and burned it to the ground. "This is not a negotiation," I said, my final words to them. "This is a notification." And I clicked end call. The silence in my apartment in the moments after was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It was absolute, total. It was the silence of a battlefield after the war is over. The silence of complete and total victory. I had won. I had defended my fortress. I had routed the enemy. Every move had been calculated. Every strategy executed to perfection. I was free. I walked over to the large window that overlooked the city. The lights of Manhattan glittered below, a galaxy of strangers. So many people, so much life. And I was completely, utterly alone. I had severed the ties. But the ties, toxic as they were all I had. The ghosts of my family were finally exorcised, but in their place. There was nothing, just a vast empty space. I had spent my life craving their approval. Then I had spent weeks craving their defeat. Now I had it, and the grim satisfaction I had expected felt hollow. Was it worth it? To protect my life's work, my sanity, my future? Yes, 1,000 times yes, but the cost of that freedom was an amputation. I had cut off a part of myself, a diseased and gangrenous limb, to be sure. But the phantom pain of it was real. I won the war, but there's no one here to celebrate with. There's no one to call. There's only me, my fortress, and the view. The suburbs are full of ghosts, I know, because I am one of them now too. A ghost in my own life story, haunting the silence of a victory that tastes an awful lot like loss. A complete, methodical victory. That tastes an awful lot like loss. The script ends on such a powerful, heavy note. It's a profound reminder that sometimes the cost of absolute freedom is an amputation. You win the war, but you're left standing completely alone in the fortress you built. Thank you so much for staying through this intense story with us. This is a narrative that is guaranteed to spark a lot of debate, and I truly want to know what you think. Was this a necessary act of self-preservation, or did the solution become just as cold as the problem? Leave your honest take in the comments below. If this story resonated with you and you found value in this breakdown, please like the video. And if you want more deep dives into these kinds of complex, difficult, and powerful narratives, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. Until next time, stay strong and know your worth.